afternoon, everybody. This is Brandon Tilt, and you're tuning into the Feather of Light podcast. Today, I'd like to explore the topic of needs. What is it we need? What is it we need in each moment? What even are some basic essential needs that we as humans, I would say, require or prefer or need? But when I explore this topic, I really want to reference a couple things that I've been actively reflecting on. And one of which would be, what are our needs in the context of being a client with any coaching or counseling relationship? What might our needs be in those containers or relationships? And also considering what might our needs be as participants in retreats, whether that be a breath work or yoga or meditation retreat, or my more personal lens, I suppose, or what I've experienced would be plant medicine retreats. And what are the needs of the clients or participants in those experiences and how that might differ? And then lastly, looking to this wide world of marketing and branding and social media and spiritual offerings left and right, and how there might be this pressure about what someone tells us we need, or they create an experience that kind of glistens and speaks to us and attracts us and looks like it's the thing that we need. But truly checking in and having the awareness or the discernment to really know what it is that we actually need on a deeper level, or when something isn't in alignment with our needs. So I guess I'll start off with, what are some basic human needs? The obvious ones are survival needs, so food, water, oxygen, and it goes to, shelter. And I would say those are the sort of the basic human needs, but then it extends onto community and human connection and friendship, having friends, and of course physical needs such as sexual needs, the need for touch, the need for non-romantic sensual interactions, sometimes known as cuddling, or even just a hand on our shoulder, or someone putting their hand on our back in a supportive way. And then there are other needs that are more abstract, right? Need for safety, security, stability. Maybe even you go all the way to the top of Maslow's hierarchy, if you know what that is. You get a self-actualization, or purpose, or meaning, right? So these are just things that we all, on some level, require to feel, I would say, maybe happy or fulfilled or just balanced within our lives. And many times we aren't having all our needs met. And I think that's also perfectly normal. Our needs change day by day, moment to moment. They shift, and oftentimes, and this is what I've noticed with many clients, counseling or coaching, is we don't even really know what our needs are. There's a a lack of attunement to what we need in a given interaction or from a given experience or event. And there's often, I would say, external pressures or other people telling us this is what you need, right? Late stage capitalism and commercials and all the different ways advertisements are being included within our sphere, our media, our attention in a way is being drawn towards so many different things. And we're being told that that's what we need. You need this type of food. You need this thing in your life. And it's like the material things can on some level satisfy a certain need, a survival need, or a need for distraction or pleasure or comfort. But do they actually satisfy the deeper needs, the core necessities, or I would say the more important, more meaningful needs, like spiritual connection or feeling connected, connectedness in general, or feeling fulfilled or harmonious or having inner peace. There's a need for inner peace oftentimes. And are these things really satisfying that need? And are we even really in touch with what our needs are? I would say many times we're disconnected from what our needs are in general, as well as in each moment. And I mean, let's just take this as an experiential process or exercise. What do you really need right now? What might your needs be as you're sitting and listening to this podcast? Are you searching for, some answer to some question? Is there a need for validation of your beliefs? Is there a need for clarity of some idea? Or maybe clarity about something I offer or who I am, I don't know. And a need for understanding. Or maybe through my reflections, there's a sense of feeling understood by another, a need for normalization of your experiences. And these are some of the things I try to foster within this podcast. But it could also be as simple as, do you need to find comfort? Do you need to quench your thirst? Hydrate yourself? And I would like to maybe start to shift into these other topics that I relate to needs. So my first topic I'd like to discuss: what are needs that a coaching or counseling client, they're two different processes. So maybe just starting with, what might some needs be for a coaching client? And some of the things that I've noticed some of my coaching clients come in, and what they first need is transparency, or maybe even just a need for clarity around what the coaching process even is. And oftentimes we'll explore that in the first 15 minutes or maybe the first 1 hour session. And if you were to compare this to counseling, however, there can be very different needs. There can be needs for safety. There can be a need for trust, or I would say more around the capacity to build trust in a relationship. There's the need for confidentiality, which I would say is of the utmost importance in a counseling or coaching role. And maybe on some level a need for assurance or reassurance that they're at the right place with the right person. Some of these things I can't really just guarantee outright. It's like, yeah, I'm the right person for the job for you, no problem. That's not quite in alignment with my value of authenticity. So depending on the client, there might be more of a need for authenticity within that container. That I'm expressing myself from an honest place, from an authentic place. That I'm not trying to mislead them or persuade them or lead them towards a specific outcome that I personally determine as the right place to be. And so, yeah, like, in addition to all these other needs, all these other potential needs based on who the client is and why they're coming to counseling or coaching or whichever one, I would say there's a need to be treated fairly, equally, and ethically. And this is inherent within the counseling profession, and this is oftentimes something that's honored in the coaching profession as well. But I would say is more commonly a challenge for a client to really understand or even really recognize if there is a lack of ethical practices within their practitioner's practice. So what are some things that I would say are indicators of a ethical practitioner? I mean, first and foremost is quite obvious: certification. That would be that this practitioner has dedicated themselves to learning basic practices and skill sets and has dedicated a certain amount of hours and of value, monetary value of their own invested into learning, into growing, into being held accountable, and has gone through what I would consider the bare minimum of transformation in order to fully embody the role that they're stepping into. And in addition to this, the credentials aren't everything, right? They are, I would say, a bare minimum or a basic standard of the commitment or the investment to this learning process that they've engaged in. But some other, not necessarily requirements in coaching, but they are in counseling, would be paperwork such as contracts or liability forms or waivers or proof of insurance or all these other documents that allow a person to really feel and recognize and see with their own eyes that there is more of a process of creating safety within that container than just the person's word, which I would like to say we can take someone at their word, but not always, right? People do sell us experiences, ideas, and some of which maybe aren't in integrity with their word. And that's not to throw shade or say that some people are practicing right or wrong morally. It's really just a matter of a fact. It's a fact of life. We make promises that we don't keep. And we try our best to keep some of these things. And maybe that's part of the process of growth is trying to find a way to really stay in alignment with the promises that we make, and then being held accountable, and then knowing how to uphold those promises, those agreements with integrity. So, just to review, certifications, very helpful. Contracts or other documents, maybe just a desire to create the container in a really strong and integral way. So agreements and starting to kind of assess with the person collaboratively, what are we going to do here? What do we want to do here? What are your intentions? What are your goals? What are ways I can show up better? What's your history of working with a practitioner, and how can we explore that and get curious around that and understand you as an individual and your experience of these types of containers? And I would say this can vary a lot, but also sometimes you can learn from how a person reflects their value through price. Are they quote unquote overcharging? Are they undercharging? Just understanding what the basic monetary compensation is for this service, and then seeing how this person essentially has determined their value. And if they're charging a tremendous amount of money, well, is this ethical for you as a client? Is this a normalized expectation as a buy-in for you to invest in someone's services or this process of growth? And maybe it is. Maybe that's exactly what it costs. And, there's a fine line between knowing what a client ought to pay and what's a fair amount, and just honoring the value that a person brings into your life as a professional. So this is just some of my perspective as a counselor and practicing coach. I'm trained in both. I've run professional practices in both these fields, and my understanding of what the needs are from the client's perspective. And I want to revisit this topic a lot more, but for the sake of time, I'm going to shift into this other topic. So this other topic is related to needs as well. But from my understanding, it pertains more to what are the needs of participants in plant medicine ceremonies. And I know I talked about all these other types of ceremonies. Maybe I can get more into each of those individually at a later episode, because I've been to a lot of breathwork ceremonies, but I've also not really seen much of the back end. I'm not a breathwork facilitator, and I've been to many yoga classes, but very few, if any, actual yoga retreats. And I'm yet to attend a Vipassana, so my observations around that would be purely speculation. Now, as someone who's attended an ayahuasca retreat, quite a lengthy one, at least from the normal standard, and then also volunteered at 3 consecutive retreats and reflected on the back end experience of many guests, I would say, yeah, I understand and I can speak to what are the needs of retreat participants when attending an ayahuasca retreat. So just to jump on in, I would say ability to really understand what it is they're investing in, whether it be the specific types of ceremonies, the frequency of the ceremonies, the shamans and their offerings and what they offer. Or it could be the space itself, it could be a little bit more luxurious or comfortable, or it could be more bare bones. It could be the proximity to the jungle or away from the jungle in some more remote location. You're kind of gauging what it is you need as a participant. This varies quite a bit, but also maybe the level of, let's just call it, how foundational or how introductory the retreat is. So how beginner friendly is it essentially? And I can really speak to, in Ecuador, it was more designed for folks who are just going and drinking ayahuasca, or maybe even it's their first ever experience with a psychedelic, and it's their first time really diving into this container, and it's designed to help create safety and support a person in that. Versus in Peru, the dieta protocols, the restrictions, the intensity of the ceremony experience, it was all tailored towards someone who I would say is ready to go a little bit deeper. And maybe it could be their first ceremony drinking ayahuasca, but it's probably not their first experience of a psychedelic. It's probably not their first experience doing healing, as it would be described in a lot of ways. And there's a lot more I would say there's a lot more value and a lot more benefit to upping the ante, upping the stakes, having a higher level of expectations. So in addition to this, the needs of any ayahuasca retreat would be around creating limitations and restrictions, whether these are relating to the diet, the food that they consume, or this could be related to the social dieta, as it's called, so not having too many different people in your bubble or your environment or your atmosphere. Or this could be pertaining to the information dieta, which is the information that you consume, not being overtly sexual or aggressive. You're not watching horror movies or, violent television, or, maybe you're abstaining from pornography, or trying your best to really abstain from sexual thoughts. And these are some of the preparation protocols that are, I would say, having an awareness around this is a need. There's a need for transparency, a need for preparation, and in addition to that, integration. So what is the need for integration? That can be very complex, but I would say that just having the conversation about what integration looks like, or having resources available at the retreat where you're able to integrate. So for instance, I want to offer art therapy workshops, or, maybe movement or breath work, but probably sticking more to kind of art workshops. And I would love that to be an extension of ayahuasca retreats, but it's also, I would say, very important outside of the retreats. And just having something of a continued ongoing process that allows you to unpack and continue the healing process after you leave the retreat. But this also could look like preparing yourself emotionally or mentally or physically once you leave the atmosphere of this bubble that is a retreat, and then returning to the overstimulating, often highly stressful environment that we have in the West in our 9-to-5. The economic expectations create just so much of a necessity to hustle, to just barely take care of ourselves. And a lot of the work that we've done in these retreats often falls to the wayside. We aren't able to really continue the same standards of self-care, or let's say even just connecting to our spirit and connecting to our heart, or connecting with others in a meaningful way. So the integration process is some of these things and or potentially all of these things. And I would say that's a need for a participant. It's a foundational, fundamental need is to just be aware of what the integration process is, and what are some steps that they can take in order to really continue the work that they've done at these retreats. And lastly, this topic came up as more of a reflection in one of my coaching sessions where I was working with my coach, so I was the client. And I started to think a lot about all these offerings and retreats and all these spaces that exist in my community and maybe other communities as well. The ones that are in the West, not necessarily the offerings that exist that I experienced in Ecuador or Peru, just kind of looking at what's available to me now for the most part. And was really considering how there's this tendency to market that we're trying to sell these experiences to people, right? If you're a spiritual seeker of sorts, or you're a healer on the path of such and such, or you're a plant medicine connoisseur, whatever, you're a great fit for this thing, right? You see this thing and it's kind of like tailored towards you, made for you. It's attractive to you. It's like the people there are an extension of you and your energy. And they might be. I'm not saying they aren't. I mean, it's very likely you'll meet someone cool there. But like, there's this weird kind of like idea that these experiences are so tantalizing and so attractive that they understand what you need even more than you understand what you need. And in a culture, as I've really made quite clear, that seems to do that very, very consistently. And we're so out of touch, oftentimes, with all of our needs, even just basic human survival needs, or the things that are core fundamental needs that we as humans feel we ought to have met, like safety, stability, emotional intimacy, connection, community. And if these things aren't met, damn, we feel disconnected or out of alignment or out of touch with something deeper. Disconnected spiritually, right? Like this is like the big core wound that Gabor Mate talks about with addiction. We're disconnected from spirituality or something spiritual within us. So anyway, these experiences, these retreats, these events, they kind of mark it in a way where it's like, I feel like you're missing this thing, and this is what you need to get you that need or to fulfill that need. And I don't feel like that's actually getting us closer to understanding what we need. I mean, it does, at least not directly, because it does in some sense. Experientially, we go and we can experience something and we were like, oh, that kind of felt kind of cool. And some aspects of this did meet my needs or expectations or whatever. But then you walk away going, okay, maybe that's also what I didn't need. And that's a valuable experience as well. But I would say, in a sense, these retreats are pulling people in because they don't fully understand what it is they truly do need. And they're willing to kind of take something that's close. And this has been my experience of returning to Canada after spending 5.5 months traveling, and at least 4 of those months in South America. And really feeling like I was where I wanted to be and where I belonged, and on a deeper level, my soul felt so aligned. And then coming here back to the West, it just it feels very challenging to meet those same needs. And oftentimes I'm recognizing what I thought I needed before, right? What I thought I was fulfilling through community events and song circles and breathwork ceremonies and all these really, really cool things, just wasn't really doing it for me. And now I come back and I realize they're not what I needed or not what I continue to need. And the more I can set boundaries around that, I can get myself closer to what actually feels like it's fulfilling these deeper needs for love, creativity, exploration, connectedness, spiritual wholeness, service, community, and so many more things. Like, that's just like scratching the surface. But all the different needs that I had met over there in Ecuador and Peru, that on some level are met here, but just oftentimes I feel like they're just reminders that I gotta go find something that really meets those needs, and almost just bringing awareness to the fact that I'm in touch with my needs. They're a helpful reminder. I would say they remind me that, hey, before I didn't know what I needed, and I was en route to figuring that out. But now that I do know what I need, I set boundaries around places that aren't in alignment with that, and I charge directly towards things that are, and I fucking feel confident that those are the things that are contributing to me becoming the person that I want to become, to being of service in the way I want to be of service. And no one can tell me otherwise. no advertisement, no marketing tactic, no, fancy, attractive experience can tell me otherwise. And I feel very confident and at ease and grounded within saying that. And there's always going to be perspective shifts. And I'm not going to pretend I have it all figured out, because I really fucking don't. But there is a beautiful level of assurance and internal validation that I've found from doing what I've been doing, whatever that is. And I'm happy that I've reached this awareness about my needs, and that I can use that, I can utilize that to support others and allow them to essentially create space so they can understand and attune to their needs and know what that is, and then make decisions that allow them to move through their life confidently and with the internal validation, intrinsic validation and motivation that what they're doing is the right thing to do, and they know it on a deeper level. And nobody, no advertisement, no commercial, no thing, no material possession can convince them otherwise, because they just know. Anywho, this has been my reflection and sort of tangent into all these other related topics about needs, attuning to one's needs, understanding from the perspective of a client of a counseling or coaching container, of a retreat space, whether that's a plant medicine or other. And of course, the very real struggle of knowing whether or not something is for you. So take what I say with a grain of salt, really. I recognize that some of this advice may not be for you, and I advise you to reflect on that. Check in with yourself. Does this really land? And I really just openly invite you to consider my words, which I do choose carefully, and consider the energy to which I bring to this podcast. And for those who are still around, just want to let you know that I am looking to create many offerings. I'm going to be starting up art workshops, which will allow people to tune into their creative expression for sake of processing emotions, for sake of processing challenging spiritual events, whether those are plant medicine or otherwise. I'm offering people the space to tune in. And in addition to that, I offer one-on-one counseling. So I'm currently not taking on any coaching clients, but for counseling, I would welcome anyone to reach out. Whether you're on the spiritual path or not is not relevant, but I would welcome you to reach out, and we can discuss the idea of constructing a container where you can just be in your authentic experience, exploring who you are, what you've experienced, how that shaped you, maybe introducing some creativity, some writing or art exercises, maybe some parts work explorations through meditations, and then landing at a point where you feel like you have a little bit more clarity about who you are and how you can show up in your life and what your story is. And then maybe you can find your way to be of service. Service is a high calling. I do honestly believe we all are healers. We all have medicine. So I'm offering the opportunity to get more in touch with yourself so that you're able to bring in that healing energy and find your medicine and be of service. Thank you for joining me today, my friend. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care for now.